Almeen sang to me this morning.
Who did?
Gary.
All right, like I said, this is being recorded. It's 12 o'clock, so I'm gonna get going. This is my first time presenting this information, so I don't like just reading from slides, but I'm gonna do a lot of reading from slides. So, and this is likely only gonna be, I scheduled it for an hour, but it won't be an hour. It'll be probably half hour to 45 minutes. This is a required training according to the HIPAA regulations. We've been out of compliance for quite some time. Not that we haven't been completely out of compliance. We've been providing a very general HIPAA training through, first we provided it through the MEMIC Safety Academy. And now we're offering it through Paylocity, and I truly apologize for all the confusion around that. I thought it had been assigned through MEMIC, and then Kelly confirmed to me that a while ago we took it off. So that was the confusion there. But I did just reassign it to everyone through Paylocity. It's a broad overview of HIPAA, so I'm not going to go too much into the HIPAA regulations. What I'm going to do is talk about, I'll do a brief overview, but then this is more of a discussion about how GMS remains in compliance with the HIPAA security rule. Okay? And feel free to ask any questions as we go. So this is about HIPAA security. Our agenda for the next half hour or so: what is HIPAA? Who has to comply with the regulations? What protected health information actually is? And then what are the GMS HIPAA security practices? And again, feel free, particularly towards the end of a slide, if you have a question, feel free to just chime in. Most people don't know what HIPAA actually stands for. It stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. HIPAA, the regulation required that the Health and Human Services Secretary of the US, it requires that individual to issue privacy regulations governing individually identified health information. It's meant to be a framework for the establishment of protection of patient health information, security of electronic systems, and a set of standards requirements for electronic transmission of health information. And it's a very lengthy regulation. So the HIPAA regulation actually consists of 3 different rules: the privacy rule, the security rule, and the enforcement rule. The privacy rule is covered under that generic HIPAA training that everyone has taken at some point in the past and will take through the new Paylocity training. Today, we're going to primarily focus on the security rule. And I'll just quickly, I have one slide regarding the enforcement rule. The enforcement rule is also quite lengthy, but there's really not too much information in there that you need to be concerned with. HIPAA addresses these four items that HIPAA addresses primarily falls under the enforcement rule, but the concept of knowledge, willful neglect, reasonable cause, and business associates. Now, those first 3 are considerations under the enforcement rule. Those first 3 items really are what they consider when they determine, fines. Okay, who has to comply? Individuals, organizations, and agencies that meet the definition of a covered entity under HIPAA must comply with the rules requirements to protect the privacy and security of health information, and must provide individuals with certain rights with respect to their health information. If a covered entity engages a business associate to help it carry out its health care activities and functions, the covered entity must have a written business associate contract. We do have multiple business associate contracts. We probably have well over, we probably have close to 150 business associate contracts because we include shared living providers. They fall into the business associate. So shared living providers and other vendors that we work with all have to sign a business associate contract. And I believe Nicole is the keeper of the contracts at this point. If you didn't know that, I guess I'm informing you now. At least I was told to give them all to you. GMS is considered a covered entity, which is why we're doing this training. The privacy rule protects all individually identified health information held or transmitted by a covered entity or its business associate in any form or media, whether electronic, paper, or oral. The privacy rule calls this information protected health information, so PHI. It's important to know what these acronyms mean because we use them quite often. So what is individually identified health information? It includes demographic data that relates to an individual's past, present, or future physical or mental health condition, the provision of health care to the individual, or the past, present, or future payment for the provision of health care to the individual that identifies the individual or for which there is a reasonable basis to believe it can be used to identify the individual. Individually identifiable health information includes many common identifiers such as name, address, date of birth, social security number. So GMS is a covered entity. We provide healthcare services, okay, that's billable through main care. So all the service we provide consumers that we document for is considered healthcare. So a lot of their information, their identifiers are protected health information. Additionally, it covers a lot of information I keep as the HR director.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm sorry, could you go back to that last slide? So under the
You'll have to speak up or I can barely hear you.
under the PHI, and this is just specific to GMS, when we go in and we have to sign in, our names are on those forms that we have to sign in under. So isn't that information covered under PHI? Should our names not be on those forms that we have to sign in and check our temperatures and stuff like that? Those health questions?
Those forms shouldn't have.
There's been a lot of discussion around that. That's actually, there's been a lot of discussion around that, and the general consensus, there hasn't been very good guidance on that, and I can tell you that most agencies are doing what we're doing. You can certainly opt to not put your name on it. It's not a provision of health care. I mean, it takes your temperature, but there's no health care being provided. You could argue either way. I mean, it's a very valid question, and we've actually discussed that quite a bit in our HR group meetings. The consensus is that it's not protected health information.
The new form has your employee ID number.
Yeah, I know. But also on the front page, at the bottom of that form, it asks for you to print and sign your name.
Yes, right.
Take off page 1, because every form after that is just your employee number.
Okay.
Because the form got double-sided, which it shouldn't have. Page 1 should have just been you signing that document, and then it gets turned in, and then every page after that is just your employee ID.
Okay, all right.
So, all right, well, that's why we have these discussions. You brought up a good point, Stacy, and this is why it takes everyone to be in compliance with this rule. There's so many layers to it, and we're not in 100% compliance, I can tell you that. but we're working towards it. So anyway, those records with our temperatures, when those are done, or when there's one of the forms is completed or filled out completely, those will actually be scanned into the HR confidential folders within the person's health information for keeping for 6 years. Which brings up the next point, records retention and destruction. A covered entity must maintain until 6 years after the late date of their creation or last effective date, its privacy policies and procedures, its privacy practices notices, disposition of complaints, and other actions, activities, and designations that the privacy rule requires to be documented. So that includes hopefully and this is something Nicole and Jessica might, check on. Hopefully within the consumer binders, there's a place to track when PHI is being released. That is something that's supposed to be there, and we're supposed to maintain that record for at least 6 years. That's true of course, shared living folders as well. Other retention, destruction of sensitive records. HR keeps I-9 separate from payroll and personnel records. Files should be locked or password protected, which right now we don't have any paper files any longer. That's why everything is password protected. Any annual review, none of our annual reviews have social security numbers, but annual reviews and such should be kept separate from payroll records and also restricted if social security are on any documents. Employee medical records should be kept separate. Every employee does have a separate medical record, separate from their personnel file, and it's actually kept in a completely separate folder, and there's only a few people who have access to it. Limited access should be granted to sensitive files, and I'll go into that a little bit more later. Non-medical information should also be given follow the minimum necessary guidelines. So even if it's not medical information, if it's sensitive information, we should still follow the minimum necessary guidelines, meaning minimum necessary access. HIPAA-like guidelines should be part of policy enforcement for all information regardless of statute. So when in doubt, treat it like HIPAA covers it. More about the security rule. Security rule requires covered entities to maintain reasonable and appropriate administrative, technical, and physical safeguards to protecting ePHI. ePHI is electronic health information, protected health information. Specifically, covered entities must ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of all ePHI they create, receive, maintain, or transmit. Identify and protect against reasonably anticipated impermissible uses or disclosures, and ensure compliance by their workforce. All right, I have a poll I'm going to put out. The polls are de-identified. No one's going to know what your answer is. I'm just going to throw this out. If you could answer. Did everyone see it? Okay, I'm going to end the poll. All right, so 5 said each affected person, and the rest of you, 10 of you, said all of the above. It is actually all of the above. Believe it or not, if we have a breach of ePHI, at any level, whether it's just one person or several people, we do have to notify the Department of Health and Human Services. In addition to each affected person, and if it affects over 500 people, we have to notify the media. So that's why huge breaches, like, you know, we had that Target breach a few years ago of several thousand people. That was in the news. Every time there's a huge breach, you see it on the news. So. Okay. The security rule requires security management process. A covered entity must identify and analyze potential risks to EPHI, and it must implement security measures that reduce risk and vulnerabilities to a reasonable and appropriate level. Our response, or what we do with this, is that I and one HR specialist, Shyla, have been we've been assigned these roles, okay? So right now I act as the compliance officer, and Shyla acts as the security officer. The two of us together review our 135-page HIPAA policy, and then from that, we are slowly developing protocols, policies, and procedures to ensure that actually everything within our very lengthy policy is followed. So it's been a lengthy project. So security rule requires security personnel. A covered entity must designate a security official who is responsible for developing and implementing its security policies. And I just mentioned that. Again, that's me and Shyla. It requires information access management. The security rule requires a covered entity to implement policies and procedures for authorizing access to EPHI only when such access is appropriate based on the user's role. During our last assessment by Maine Technology Group, they did a HIPAA assessment of our agency. This is one aspect we got dinged on the most. We had too many people with too much access. In addition to that, we had generic access for DSPs. So each home had separate access. We didn't have individual logins for the DSPs. We've been rolling that out over the last few weeks, and I suspect by the end of next week it'll be complete. Every single DSP will have their own individual access, and they'll have very limited access to the server. Because of this, if you've ever requested access to something from Maine Technology Group and they say, well, I have to ask Matt first, don't be insulted by that. It's just part of our policy that I'm the lead person for the information access management, okay? The security rule requires workforce training and management. The covered entity must train all workforce members regarding its security policies and procedures. It must have and apply appropriate sanctions against workforce members who violate its policies and procedures. So this is why we have this training in addition to the Paylocity training. So the generic training plus the GMS specific training. Again, the GMS specific training is required by the security rule and GMS policy. And we're going to have to do it yearly. Employees who violate HIPAA security policies and procedures will be subject to progressive disciplinary actions, including possible termination. Okay, we take it very seriously. Evaluation, the security rule requires routine evaluation. A covered entity must perform a periodic assessment of how well its security policies and procedures meet the requirements of the security rule. And we have Maine Technology Group complete that for us yearly. And they give us, they basically grade us. And then they recommend corrective action. So some of GMS's practices to be in line with the security rule. We require individual logins. Again, we're not 100% with this just yet. Not all DSPs have individual logins. We're getting there. Password security. How many of you put your password on a sticky note on your computer? You don't have to answer that, but answer that for yourself. And if you do that, it's a big no-no. Don't put passwords on your computer or on sticky notes or save it on your desktop. You're gonna have to, you need to save it in a secure location, like your head is the best place for it, or someplace completely separate from your workstation. Telephone callback. So what this is people who are out to get our information, it's a full-time job for them. And they're very good at it. I'll share a brief story. My father who was elderly, received a phone call from someone who was claiming he was an attorney for a friend of his. Stated his friend had been in an accident, killed someone in Massachusetts, and was now in jail. And this attorney was convinced my father, who was otherwise generally a very savvy individual, but given his age and early dementia, was easily conned by this person. This person was able to get about $4,000 from my father within an hour to bail out his friend. Now, this person had intimate details from my father and his friend. Where he got that? Well, it's hard to figure that out, but likely Facebook. Okay. So anyways, what a telephone callback is if you receive a telephone call from someone who's trying to attain, confidential information about the agency or yourself, get a callback number and tell them that you'll look into the validity of their call and that you will call them back. Okay. Certainly talk to someone like myself or talk to someone who would know about the validity of that call before you call them back. You should have an automatic log off for your computer. After so many minutes of inactivity, it should log off. If it doesn't, put in a ticket and they'll set that up for you. We also have audit trails. We know who's been on your, well, the audit trails are only as good as the login. This is why we have individual logins. So we know who's accessed what based on the login. So if you're not logged off and someone gets on your computer and they start messing around and they start getting into stuff that you shouldn't be getting into, it's going to look like you got into it. Okay. Any questions about that? We have building security. So all of our doors are locked. We have one point of entrance for the public, and people get buzzed in or let in by an individual, and then they're supposed to sign in, okay? And part of our building security is that no one wanders around the building without someone with them, okay? If you see someone wandering around the building, you should ask them if they can be helped, and If they're looking for someone, have them go sit back at the front desk while you go find that person, okay? This, I think, is something that we can get a little lax in, but we will be tested. We likely have been tested. Well, we haven't been tested yet, but it's part of our security package with Maine Technology Group that they're always testing us, usually through attempted spam, but it wouldn't be out of the question for them to try to test our building security by wandering our halls. Protect your workstations. The computer should always be locked when a person who uses it is away from the desk. This is to prevent unauthorized use, okay? So Control-Alt-Delete and lock your computer when you leave your office. Do not open email attachments unless you are sure of its source. But even if you're sure of its source, does it make sense that that person is sending you that attachment? Again, these get very sophisticated. I've gotten emails that seem, you know, okay, this is something that this person might actually be sending me, but you should always check with that person before opening the attachment. And don't check with them by replying to the email. I've actually replied to emails. For instance, I got an email from someone from Living Innovations. I replied to it, and then the person immediately replied back. But you know what? That person who replied back to me was not the actual person who I thought it was. It was someone ghosting the email. So it ended up being a scam. Had I opened the attachment, okay, if you open the attachment, please notify me and notify Maine Technology Group as soon as possible. It's more important you notify Maine Technology Group as soon as possible. You can submit an urgent ticket or send them an email. They'll do a scan of your computer and then a scan of our network. Any questions or stories around that? Anyone been scammed? You just don't want to share it. It's okay. It's happened to most of us. We have a sign-in sheet. Again, additional security practices. We have a sign-in sheet for the waiting area. Computer screens should be turned away from public view. If your computer screen is not, please set up your computer in a way that people cannot see protected health information from the hallway or the window outside your office, if you have a window outside your office. If you're unable to do that, let me know and I'll order you, I forget what they're called, but they go over your screen and it only allows you to view the screen if you're looking at it head on. I forget what they're called, but I can order one for you if your office doesn't allow for you to rearrange appropriately. At-rest PHI encrypted computers. All of our laptops, all of our computers are encrypted, meaning the server is encrypted. So if someone was to steal your laptop, they would not be able to access any information on that laptop unless it is saved on your desktop. Your desktop is not encrypted. So do not save private information, PHI, on your desktop. I'm willing to bet if I looked at all of your computers, probably half of you have protected health information on your desktop. Because I've seen it. So please take all that and save it into the server. And then it'll be protected. If you have any questions about that, you know, reach out to me or Dante. The server is backed up to prevent destruction of PHI. We have
I have a quick question for you.
yes.
So we used to all have like our own like a Tangway server.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if mine has disappeared, does that mean as an agency we don't have those anymore, or is that something that I'd call MTG about?
Yeah, call, you still have it. Call, put in a ticket for it and ask them to map it for you so that you can see it. Just tell them you cannot see your A Tangway file on the server.
All right, thank you.
And they'll map it so it's visible to you. Does everyone know what she's talking about? You should all have your own files for whatever you might use it for. Okay. All of our computer hardware is inventoried. This is why we've asked for your computer names in the past. We've done that to backtrack to get computer names so we know where all of our computers are. But now every time a computer is issued, Shyla jots down the name of the computer so we know exactly where it is and who has it. That way, if it's lost as well, we can make sure it's removed from the server. The server is housed in a locked location. This is why not many people have access to the upstairs area. The upstairs area, just beyond my office, there's that stairway. Most of you have probably been up there, but there's only a few of us who have keys for it. That's because there's sensitive PHI files saved up there. There's a lot of old HR paper files up there. They're locked up. But additionally, our server hardware is up there. It's now better protected than it used to be. It really should be in its own separate room, but it's in its own separate area up there. But very few people should have access to up there. And if you do go up there, you usually, one of us who has a key should be following you up there. Okay. And please don't take it personally. Again, it's just part of our practices. Okay, another poll. And it's okay, this is anonymous, so you can be honest. So we got 2 people who haven't voted yet. One more person. I'll end it in 6 seconds.
Submit it.
Okay. Well, this is pretty good. If this is pretty good, it should be a complex combination of at least 7 characters. More common now are phrases, which is actually a good thing. You know, coming up with a phrase that only would make sense to you. And it also helps for you to more easily remember it, okay? Passwords that contain your name of a loved one or pet, that's very common. So I'm surprised only one of you had that down.
Only one of us were honest about it.
Yes, Terry, one of you, Terry, was honest. And
Wonder who that was.
It was me. I'm being honest.
old nicknames, that sort of thing. It's just, you know, the risk to that obviously is that someone could eventually potentially guess it if maybe they spent the time looking on your, again, Facebook.
Mm.
And then, believe it or not, very commonly, people's password is actually the word password. But it's good. Looks like everyone is doing the right thing. And I'm sure the one person who's got the name or name of a loved one also has some numbers and special characters mixed in there.
Yes, I do.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And here's one more. All right, give it 10 more seconds. All right, everyone is. Okay, everyone guessed correctly. Actually, either one of those is correct. You can, in the subject line, you can type in encrypted or confidential, and it'll encrypt the email. It'll make it garble for anyone who is savvy enough to be able to intercept it. Okay. All right, good job with that. All right, but before I get into this, any questions at all about anything that we talked about?
No.
The very last, my last slide is just a quick slide about the enforcement, the potential fines, the civil penalties. You can see we're looking at up to $1.5 million in fines. Anywhere from $100 to $1.5 million. And what this has to do with, if you remember back from the first slide, they do consider whether it was willful neglect or not. They do consider whether this was your first time. Was it reasonable negligence, or did reasonable negligence? Were you exercising reasonable diligence, but it still happened? For instance, you take a consumer out, you have their emergency pack, right? And you left it in the car and then someone stole that. Well, would we be fined? Maybe, maybe not. But if we did, it likely would only be the bare minimum of $100, because you know, you should double lock it, meaning if you have that emergency pack, and I'm not a residential manager or director, I don't actually know what directions you guys are given with that, but the emergency packs, unless you have them on you, should be, if you're gonna leave them in the car, they should be locked in the glove compartment or even the trunk. So they can't be easily stolen. But, all right, that is my presentation. Any questions whatsoever?
I have a question.
Okay. Uh-oh.
Is that a penalty to the covered entity or to the individual?
That is the covered entity.
Okay. So if an individual is, say, disgruntled, they can just violate it and you will pay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will tell you, agency personnel like directors, like for instance, HR directors, you know, company directors are often held accountable personally.
Yeah.
You know, I have a certain amount of liability as the HR director and being the compliance officer. It is, if we were grossly negligent and we just, of course, it would be a complete disregard of any of the rules and I knew about it and I just didn't care. I could be personally liable for that. So.
As an officer, okay.
As an officer, yeah. Good question. All right. No other questions? I thank you, Ed. 18 people. I appreciate you you joining us. And if you have any other questions after, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. All right.
Thank you.
Have a
Okay,
great
thank you.
afternoon.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank
Bye.
you.